I'm going to move away from my.
Well, hello, everyone. Coach Diana and I are here with you on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. Hopefully, we'll get live on Instagram in just a minute. We have a really important topic. And I'm sorry, I have a cough drop in my mouth. I was coughing again, and I don't want to have one of those coughing fits again. So, welcome. Welcome here. We just want to make sure we're live everywhere. I see Instagram is heading here. Thank you. And YouTube and Facebook, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Karen, for letting us know we're live. We're talking about a really important topic that has nothing to do with anybody but you. You ready? Is it sinful or selfish for you to be compassionate toward your own self? We were talking, Leanne and I were talking yesterday. Can you thrive in a marriage where your husband doesn't meet your needs? And I was sharing, Diana, that yesterday I was resentful towards something. And that my biggest obstacle when I feel resentful is then beating myself up for feeling resentful. Like, I should know better. I'm the leader here. I'm the Christian coach. I'm the relationship expert. I'm the person who teaches how to deal with your emotions. And I'm feeling resentful. And I'm upset with myself and angry with myself that I'm struggling with negative emotions. Anybody else raise their hand that their biggest enemy and sometimes their most destructive person is their own self in their head? They're not compassionate toward their own negative feelings. They're angry at themselves.
And it's interesting because I know you know better, but it just goes to show that we still get stuck. Right? We still get stuck in negative patterns, even towards ourselves and beating ourselves up. Absolutely.
Yeah, and we've talked about a little weight gain over the winter and all the stuff that we struggle with, our humanity, whether it's we're getting older and we look in the mirror and like, oh, the wrinkles are showing more, or we gain weight, or we're not handling ourselves the way we wish we did. And then the condemnation. It might be from your husband too, but we're just talking about our own relationship with ourselves right now. And the condemnation and sometimes the self-hatred and the bullying is all internal. It's
Absolutely.
all internal.
I should know better. I should be better. What's wrong with me? All of those words, the way that we speak to ourselves when we're noticing that we're not where or who we want to be in that moment. Sure.
Why do we do that? Why do we beat ourselves up so much?
So many reasons. One, I think, is perfectionism. We think we should be perfect. We think we shouldn't sin. We're not in touch with our own humanity.
Or maybe we're in touch with it, but we're not accepting it. Like we're not accepting. Like, how many of you ladies would raise your hand and say you say this? And now we're not just talking about, oh, I gained 5 pounds over winter, 25 pounds, whatever it is. Or, I'm getting older and I don't like it. Or, I'm having resentment and I'm embarrassed or ashamed that I feel these icky feelings. What about just making a mistake? Like, how many of you, when you make a mistake, you overdrew the checkbook or you crashed into the garage door like I did one time, or, you just made a mistake and you say to yourself, I don't know why I did that. Like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
Like, I am not allowed to be human.
Yeah.
Anybody else struggle with that?
Well, sometimes I don't even think it's thoughts. Sometimes you just feel dread towards yourself because I'm such a sensing person. I feel before I think about what's going on. And sometimes I just feel awful about myself in those moments.
Yeah, the shame. The shame of somehow I failed. I dropped the ball.
Right.
I should have known better. What's wrong with me? Those are all shaming statements, shaming self for not being better than you are, right? And the truth is, we're not better than we are because we're limited, finite human beings. But we all get into this shame attack. And I think spiritually, Scripture doesn't tell us to be hard on ourselves at all. But we believe somehow it's sinful to be compassionate toward ourselves. Like, that's giving yourself a pass. That's like giving yourself a get out of jail free card that you can just keep sinning if you're compassionate, that you're a sinner, right?
We get the idea that we're supposed to be compassionate and loving toward others. And we rob ourselves of that ability as well.
Yeah, I think if you had a good girlfriend who called you up sobbing because she made a mistake and she overdrew her checkbook or she didn't save enough for taxes and now she has to pay a
Mhm.
huge chunk of extra money,
Yeah.
you would probably be compassionate. Oh, I understand. Not that she gets a pass out of the consequences.
Mhm.
She doesn't. Just like when your husband messes up. You could be compassionate toward him. It's hard, but you could. Not that someone gets a pass from the consequences of their stupidity or their sin. We don't. What you sow, you reap. But it doesn't mean that we can't be compassionate, not poor me, but oh me. And how do I take care of me because I've messed up?
Yeah.
Who has some words of compassion for themselves? I'd love to hear what you say to yourself. If you show compassion and kindness toward your own self for whatever reason, I remember reading, I think it was a Mel Robbins book. I love her. And she said, go in the mirror every morning and give yourself a high five,
Mhm.
this affirmation of, hey, you've got this, girl, you can do this. And I don't do it. Most people don't. How many of you find yourself struggling with being affirming and compassionate, not indulgent, self-centered, but we kind of call it the same thing. Like when we're compassionate towards ourselves, we call ourselves like we're being self-centered and selfish, and those are sinful things. It's not sinful to be compassionate towards yourself, but we kind of equate those two things.
Yeah, and I think sometimes if we feel like we're being compassionate to ourselves, then we're throwing out the idea of striving or moving forward. Like we have to be harsh with ourselves in order to achieve or to overcome failures. It can be a mindset of no, I have to be tough, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I love this comment. She says, Trisha, you said, my struggle sometimes that I have to dot the I and cross the T, or I won't
Mm,
represent Christ right.
yeah.
But what if it's true that you probably won't represent Christ right all of the time? And he already knows that. He already knows that, right? And he sees us as perfect. It says in Colossians, let me grab my Bible. Hold on. Then you stop while I get my Bible.
All right. I've got a definition for you that I'd like to share that I pulled off of the internet. And I love this definition, Leslie. It says the psychological definition of self compassion is the ability to turn understanding, acceptance, and love inward. And I think of that, Leslie, and I think about what would it look like if I accepted Christ's love and took that into my heart and understanding really um, and his ability to have grace toward me. It's like something I have to think about and intentionally, purposefully do. It's not
Yeah,
natural.
we've been talking about this work. I erased it, the internal external chart. And in our workshop next week on Tuesday, which I hope you've signed up, we have over 5,000 women signed up. So I hope you're going to join us. We really want to talk about this because when our marriage fails or someone doesn't love us like we want, we don't tend, they don't show compassion toward us for sure, but we don't show compassion towards us.
Yeah.
We're like, what's wrong with me? Why can't someone love me? Why doesn't he love me? Why would he cheat on me? I'm such a loser. And then we just beat. And so not only do we have the hard life of living with a destructive person out there, but now we also have the hard life of living with a destructive person in here, right?
Yes. Self-harm versus self-compassion.
Yes, yes. I want to
Mhm.
go back to Trisha's comment for just a minute, and then I want to get back to this. But God says this is how he sees you. This is how he sees you in Colossians 1. He's talking about Christ, and he said, who is Christ? Christ is supreme. Christ is the image of God, etc., etc., etc. Christ made peace with everything in heaven and earth by means of Christ's blood on the cross. This includes you, who were
Yeah.
once far away from God. You were his enemies, separated from him by all your evil thoughts and actions. You didn't cross the T's and dot the I's right. But now he has reconciled you to himself through the death of Christ in his body. As a result, he has brought you into his own presence. And you are, not you will be, you are holy and blameless as you stand before him without a single fault.
Wow.
That's like too good to be true.
Holy and blameless in his eyes.
Yeah. In his eyes, you are faultless and blameless. And in our eyes, we're not faultless and blameless, but Jesus isn't counting the dots that you miss, the T's that you don't cross. He sees you differently, Tricia, than we see ourselves. And I wonder if we could just give ourselves a little love and compassion, not a pass.
Yeah.
Fail, not a pass, but a little love and compassion for our humanity.
You know, I'd like to add to that a little bit. I've been studying in Romans and memorizing some scriptures. And, you know, you said we have peace with God. He doesn't blame us. I love the idea of thinking that I'm at peace with God, because sometimes when we make mistakes, we hold ourselves accountable, and he has erased all of that. So what does it look like for me to step into that and to walk in that peace of he's not condemning me? Why am I condemning myself?
And I think this goes, you know, as we mature in this kind of thinking, this does affect our relationships. But I think the mistake that Christian counselors and Christian leaders have made with this kind of respect is that even though God erases it, he doesn't erase the consequences. And the consequences sometimes are very painful. So divorce is a painful consequence for a man who cheats and abuses you, right? And here's where we get ruined by this, is that we get filled with either guilt and shame, like, oh my gosh, I didn't forgive him and I'm a bad Christian, or we get filled with resentment and anger and hatred. And either way, it's lose for both of us. What if, and I'm saying this is a long walk, to have compassion toward that sinner and still let them experience the consequences. Because the consequences, God says, are our teachers. Like when you mess up, if you have compassion, like if you mess up and you owe $1,000 to the IRS, on the 15th because you didn't pay enough taxes. What if you had compassion toward yourself? Wow, this hurts. I was going to take my family on a vacation and now I can't. I got to use this money for my taxes. And I still have the consequences.
Yeah.
Still have the consequences. But I am going to stop beating myself up for this mistake. I'm going to learn from this mistake.
Absolutely.
I don't want to pay these consequences anymore. What would be different if your husband could do that? The person who's the most destructive in your life, if he could learn from the consequences, or if you could be brave enough to implement the consequences so that he could possibly learn from them. Right? But it's all internal. We just beat ourselves up and then we're resentful for the consequence. God, why'd you do this to me? I have a friend who's living with horrible consequences right now. And she's just, it's her own fault, but she's beating herself up for what she's done. And now she's also blaming God. It's all your fault, God. Why are you letting this happen to me? Well, he's letting this happen to you to teach you not to keep doing this, right?
Well, consequences are loving kindness, really. I mean, it's his way to bring us back to him and to really learn, right? I don't know about you, Leslie, but I want to have that compassion for other people and compassion for myself. I don't want to keep doing that again and again. I want to learn from those things. And that's what we pray for a destructive spouse, right? And how will they learn if we perpetuate that cycle and not allow them to experience the consequences?
So let's have a conversation. What's the hardest? Put a word in the chat. What's the hardest thing for you to, or what's the hardest reason for you to have that you're not compassionate on yourself? Is it because you feel that's indulging yourself, that's being too easy on yourself? Is it that you're wrong and sinful for being compassionate on yourself? Give us a word that you would say describes why you're not compassionate towards your own self. What's a word that describes why you're not compassionate toward your own self? Yeah, someone wrote in the chat, it's okay to feel tired. How many of you beat yourself up because you can't do it all? Like, What's wrong with me? I have to finish these dishes. I have to finish cleaning the house. I have to finish doing this. I have to finish doing that. And I'm exhausted. I'm falling asleep
Mhm.
at the wheel, right? Whether you're literally driving or you're falling asleep in your chair, time to go to bed. You're a body. You're human. You can't do it all. What's a word? What prevents you from being compassionate? The shoulds. The should.
Mhm.
Yes, the guilt.
Feeling
Feel
selfish.
selfish.
Mm. And this one's a strong one. Believing the lies I've been told. Those can go very deep, and they can become such an entrenched source of how you see your identity. Breaking through that is key.
Krista says unworthy. So we're going to be doing this workshop next week on the 8th. I hope you signed up. I have an amazing handout for you. If he doesn't hit you, is it still abuse? All kinds of workshop, workbook handout, 11 pages of questions, things that you can fill out, verses that you can look up. I will do a webinar that you can fill in the blanks with it. We really want you to sign up. If you're in a relationship, and it doesn't have to be a marriage necessarily, it might be an adult parent, it might be a bully boss, a bully pastor. If you're in a relationship with someone that they don't hit you, but you kind of think it's abusive, but you're not sure, please sign up for the workshop. Diana, would you be willing to put up the URL for that workshop
Sure.
while I'm talking? This is going to be next Tuesday at noon Eastern time, as well as 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. I will be giving about an hour-long workshop. You're going to need your workbook. You're going to need your pen. If you can't get you'll get sent your workbook once you sign up. You'll be filling in the blanks and you'll be reflecting on some things like, why aren't you compassionate towards your own self? So we are going to be talking about 4 ways that you will know a relationship is abusive. 4 ways that you will know whether a relationship is abusive. And then we're going to talk about 4 wrong beliefs that you've had that keep you from growing and getting healthier through this. Some of the beliefs we've talked about, like God hates all divorce, we're going to be talking about that, or I should suffer for Jesus. We're going to be talking about that. But one of the beliefs we're going to talk about is I'm not worthy. And so I love that you brought that up here, because I'm not worthy of a good relationship. I'm not worthy to be treated decently. I'm not worthy to be treated decently by me, but I'm not worthy to be treated decently by you.
Right.
Therefore, I put up with far more than I should put up with. And that's not what God is asking you to do. If we have to put up with mistreatment, where the Bible tells us put up with it, he's talking about putting up with it, like turn the other cheek or walk the extra mile. He's talking about doing that with people who are strangers to you, people who are in the government who might be oppressing you. Put up with it, he says. So he's not talking about people who are in your house, people who you're in a relationship with. In those kind of relationships, the Bible is very different advice. It says, hey, if your brother or sister sins against you, go talk to them. You have a relationship with this person, go to repair the relationship. We want to reconcile. We want to work on things. We want to heal and bring healing. And often that doesn't happen. So then what? Jesus gives you the next step and the next step. And so we're going to be talking about those differences in the workshop so that you can get crystal clear. But this not worthy piece is going to be part of the workshop, because it's not just out there. Sometimes we have the destructive relationship out there and in here because we don't feel worthy of being cared for. We don't feel worthy to stick up for ourselves. We feel less than. We feel inadequate. We feel scared and anxious about our own self. And so we want to talk about that, because that needs to be healed if you're going to be living in reality and truth. God calls us to live in truth, and you are a beloved daughter. You know that, but you're not feeling that. And that might be why you're having a hard time being compassionate toward your own self. We all are.
And Leslie, one of the things I love about the way that you teach and the way that you bring awareness is that many of our followers and our ladies don't even recognize they're in an abusive relationship. And so hearing the truth sets you free, right? Helps you to see very clearly what is happening to you. And so if that's something that you've been enduring and you don't even know you're in it, having that validation, having someone clarify for you what the scriptures teach and what abuse really is, even if it's not physical, it's very hard to define. So if you're confused about what's happening to you, or maybe you don't even really know that you're in a destructive relationship, please join the workshop. You'll get some clarity and some understanding about what is okay and what is not okay.
Yeah. And then you will get, I really want to say one thing that I believe is so true. Just like you're here right now with us, attend live the workshop. It might be a strain for you to get some privacy for that hour. It's going to be an hour long, the workshop. And then I'm going to stay. So overall, if you really want to hang out with us for the whole time, give yourself about 2.5 hours, because we have the workshop. You will have information given to you from this workbook. There is, I think, 11 pages here. And we're going to start with, are you confused? I'm filling in the blanks here. So we want you to know and get clarity about this. And it'll have slides on the thing. It'll take about an hour for me to teach this to you. And then for afterwards, one of my coaches and I will do question and answer. This will not be on Facebook. This will not be on YouTube. This will not be on Instagram, because we want it to be off of social media. So those of you who might be raising your hand and saying, oh my gosh, I am in an abusive relationship, you are now free to talk about that in the chat with an assumed name. You don't have to put your Facebook name in there, because it's not on Facebook. It won't automatically put you in the chat that way. It'll put you in however you want to put in. You can put in, my name is Susan and it's Leslie. You can put in the chat however you want to put in the chat. And you have total privacy to ask your question and be a part of a community where you will get some support and some real answers. And that is priceless. The workshop is free, but the support and community is gold. It's gold. And the question and answer time, and I'm gifting all this to you. I'm not charging, because I want you to get this information. I want women, Christian women, to get wise and strong. And it breaks my heart to see the bad advice that they've been getting. I did say that I was going to put a blog in tomorrow for something that I answered for someone who wrote to me from Facebook about an abusive relationship. Unfortunately, my editor forgot to do the blog. And so it will come out next week. I did the blog, but he edits it and he forgot. So we have a different blog out this week. That one was in the bucket beforehand. So she used that one for putting out this week. So it'll come out next week. But we want you to get educated, because you've been told sometimes that things are one way when it really isn't that way. You've been told maybe that God hates all divorce, but that's not true. That's not true. I'm going to pick that verse specifically to talk about in the workshop and show you why it's not true. So please show up. If you can't show up, I get it. Sometimes you can't, but I would encourage you. You will get a replay, but you won't get the chat and you won't the question and answer time. We want that to be pretty private. But circle your calendar right now, next Tuesday, noon Eastern time, 7:30 Eastern time, so that you can attend live. And let me just give you a hint. A lot of women say, hey, I'm going out for a little while. I've got some errands to run. They go to the grocery store and sit in the parking lot and turn their phone on and watch the workshop. That's what they do. They sit in their car and they watch the workshop all by themselves. So they have the privacy and the safety they need. I encourage you to do that if that's what you need to do. So how about some questions? Do you have any questions about your struggle in being compassionate with your own self? What's your biggest obstacle in being able to do that? Any questions there yet, Diane?
We have one question.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the line between compassion and enabling certain behaviors? My husband a few years ago lied on his tax returns for his company, and I didn't show a whole lot of compassion to him about it. Would compassion in that situation just enable his bad behavior? He felt bad about it and hasn't done it since, but I don't want to pay the consequence of his bad decision.
I wouldn't show compassion for the sin of lying about it. I think you can, if he's remorseful and he's repentant, I think saying to him, being, compassionate toward whatever it was. It wasn't the lying so much. It's why did you lie? Is
Yeah.
the question, right? So if he says, I was scared because, I spent too much money and I didn't want to, have to be accountable for that, or I was scared because we didn't have enough money in the bank to pay that difference, and so I exaggerated on my tax return. And you can have compassion sometimes for those reasons, not justifying. Again, we don't justify in compassion. Compassion isn't saying it's okay that you did that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not saying that. It's saying, I'm sorry you're suffering. I'm sorry you're suffering. So would you want to say that is he suffering? See, so when someone justifies, excuses, blames, or deflects their problem on someone else, you're not going to have compassion for that because it's unhealthy. Now, you might have compassion for his childhood that taught him those ways of dealing with things,
Right.
and that he doesn't know any better. And you might have compassion even that he's so shut down and so proud that he's not willing to learn any different. What a sad man he is. Right? But that doesn't give him a pass to harm you. Right? So this compassion is tricky because God calls us to be truthful and he calls us to be loving. And sometimes those things feel contradictory.
Yeah.
We have a second question here. My mother's example was one of being a servant and a martyr. So she was compassionate toward everybody else but her own self, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do I change my mindset to take better care of myself?
I think the first response to that is being a little bit curious about those beliefs that you have about the value of being a servant and a martyr. And I'm going to quote Adam Young, who has said that in any situation that we're struggling with, or even our past, the ability to have compassion for yourself and curiosity will take you further than any therapy can. So, being compassionate with yourself about how I came to be like this, being understanding and loving yourself in this can help move you forward. Like, just be curious. Like, when it comes up, notice, be curious. And so, when you said earlier in the conversation, Leslie, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you were mad at yourself. I've learned that when I'm struggling with something or I'm feeling something, I just notice it. And I get really curious and I'm like, oh, that's interesting, rather than beating myself up in that dialogue. So when you're bent toward wanting to be that martyr, just notice that and be curious about it, right? And have compassion for those parts of yourself that really learned this is how to be. And then we use the pause, right? And choose. And we notice, and then we choose, how do I want to be different in this moment? Right?
I love that. I love that. Yeah. And I think yesterday we talked about this tool that from the Holocaust. Viktor Frankl wrote a book called Man's Search of Meaning. He was a psychiatrist who lived in the concentration camps. And he wrote a lot of wonderful things in that book. But one of the things he says is between stimulus and response, there's a space. It might be microsecond, but there's a space. And in that space, it's really important to pause. Because otherwise, what you're going to do is just react. So if you are the kind of person in this question who reacts, oh, yes, yes, I'll be the servant and martyr. Oh, yes, yes, I'll be the servant and martyr, right? You might pause and notice, I wonder, instead of reacting as a servant and martyr, I am going to say yes. I want to raise my hand. I want to do it. I want to notice that and be compassionate and curious about why do I feel I need to jump in right now? I already know I'm tired. I'm broke.
Yeah.
I don't have any energy, and yet I'm offering to pay their rent, or I'm offering to go clean their house, or what is going on with me that my resources are depleted myself, and yet I'm still willing to be the servant and martyr of someone else's needs when my needs aren't being tended to yet either. I'm curious about that, right? I think that's what Diana is saying, is slow the wheel down. Even now, when I'm beating myself up, pause. I notice that I'm beating myself up because I felt resentment. I wonder where that's coming from. Does that usually happen to me when I start to make a mistake or I fail or fall short? Yes. I wonder what might that be from. That can begin to change the wheel, right? Instead of just reacting like we always react. Part of emotional intelligence and good internal well-being is to have the capacity, and the Bible tells us, know yourself, reflect on yourself. And we can't even know ourselves clearly enough without lights and mirrors, friends, and support systems, but we have to examine ourselves. Even in the scriptures, it says, examine yourself before you take communion. Be aware of yourself. Notice what's going on inside. And instead of being condemning when you notice, because then we won't want to look, right? So if I condemn myself for being resentful, then I'm going to deny I'm resentful because it's too painful to go there. And that's why a lot of unhealthy people just blame and deflect everybody else because they won't look in, because it hurts. And so if you don't have any compassion to deal with that hurt, like I failed, I messed up, and I feel bad. I don't have the ability to have some ability to be compassionate toward my own self. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there.
One thing I'd like to add, Leslie, that I think has, I see a lot, is that we don't feel entitled to even have a need or to know our needs.
Mm-hmm.
And in this question, it's like, that's what I'm trained to do, be a servant and a martyr. So, being compassionate to yourself and taking care of yourself is really recognizing and accepting that you have needs. And sometimes we're really bad at that.
Yeah, that you have a self, that you're not just a role, like a servant martyr role, a mom, wife role. You're a person with needs. And I think, we talked about that yesterday a little bit too. Can I thrive in a marriage where my husband is incapable of meeting my needs? Well, he may be incapable, but you aren't incapable. All right. And yet we don't meet our own needs. Like, if you need to attend this webinar, is it okay for you to take the time, an hour out of your family life, to educate yourself, to see what you might need to know? Oh, but my kids need this, or my husband needs this, or they'll be upset if I go and take it out. Well, maybe they will. But can you meet your own need? Right? Or is that selfish? Can you be compassionate toward yourself, saying, I don't like living this way. Some help.
Yeah.
And I'm going to spend an hour seeing if this person can give me some help that will enlighten me to make a different step forward. That might be a need you have. And yet, if it's always, that's selfish, it's more important, their needs. And there might be, if your child needs to go to the emergency room, skip the webinar, right? Skip the webinar. Their needs are more important in that moment.
Right.
But if it's just, I've got to do their laundry, maybe they can do their laundry, or maybe their laundry can be done tomorrow. And you can get in the car and go watch the webinar.
Yeah. So, to your point, getting in touch with your needs is key. Mary in the chat is saying it's easier to keep doing than to stop and feel. We need to stop and pause and notice. It's self-reflection if we want to be compassionate to ourselves, and we need to listen.
And these self things. So let me give you a list of self things. And I'm hearing some background noise. I'm not sure if there's something going on.
We're having a thunderstorm.
Okay, that's what it is.
It's really bad storm here in Ohio. I can try to mute in between talking.
Okay. Now I forgot what I was going to say. It'll come back. But let's answer another question.
We're
Hopefully
talking about self needs. You're going to make a
Oh,
list.
yeah. So write these down. I'm not going to talk about this in the webinar, but it'll be there in the internal part. So if you want to be a healthy person, here are the self needs that you have. Not the self skills that you need. You need self awareness, right? You have to be able to look at yourself and see yourself, what you need, what you feel, what you think, because you can't change anything if you can't see it, right? That's why we get up and look in the mirror. We look at ourselves and we say, oh my gosh, when I looked at myself in the mirror this morning, my hair did not look like this at all. It was in a point at the top of my head. Okay. So I had to make some corrections. That's not selfish. That's taking care of myself. So self-awareness. What do I notice I'm feeling? What do I notice I'm looking like? Can I make corrections? Self-reflection. Why did I do that? Why did I think that way? Why did I say that thing? Self-examination. The Bible tells us to examine ourselves. Give careful thought to your ways, Haggai 1:7 says. This is not unbiblical. So self-awareness, self-reflection, self-examination leads to the ability to self-regulate, right? How many of you lose control of your emotions because you're not capable of self-regulating, because you're not self-aware, you're not self-reflective, you're not self-examining, so you're just flying off the handle and like, what happened here? You have to self-regulate, and then you can self-correct and self-control. None of those things can happen if you don't see yourself, know yourself, reflect on yourself, so that you can regulate yourself, correct yourself, and control yourself. All biblical mandates. But guess what, ladies? That takes time. If we just got up in the morning and walked out the door like we look, we wouldn't have the same impression than if we took some time to take care of ourselves, right? And most people don't feel that selfish. If I notice in the morning I have BO, I don't beat myself up for that. I just take a shower. But yet we beat ourselves up because we don't cross our T's and dot our I's, right? If I wake up in the morning and my hair is at a point at the top of my head, I don't shave my head and say, forget that. I just get in the shower and blow dry my hair afterwards, right? But that takes time. And so does the internal work of being compassionate and truthful, right? So we can be self-indulgent and compassionate. Oh, it's okay, baby. You're a good person. It doesn't matter that you said those awful things. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, wow, you said those awful things. What was going on with you that you said that and that you felt that? And wow, let's take a break so you don't ever let yourself get to that place again. What do you need to do differently so that you're compassionate on yourself instead of letting yourself explode all over someone and now regret what you said? All right. So it's saying the truth and in love. But you can't even do that if you don't reflect on yourself and you don't take the time to do that work. And you're so busy being a martyr and a servant, but you're not taking care of you. The Bible says a couple things that I just want to emphasize, and then we're going to answer a couple more questions. The Bible says this for self-stewardship, that you are to guard your heart above all else. Who does that for you if you don't? That you are to take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Who does that for you if you don't? That you are to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Who does that for you if you don't? This is your internal work to do, regardless of what's happening in your marriage. And so we wanted to do this Facebook Live of just helping you to see that it's so easy to see all his work to do. He's got a boatload of work to do, and you're so mad that he won't do it. And maybe, just maybe, God has some work for you to do too. so that you can grow to be a healthier, stronger, more God-centered woman and not look to him for your source of your well-being. All right, a couple more questions. When should you show yourself compassion? And then how do you stop yourself from moving into victimhood?
Well, compassion is really different from victimhood. Compassion is looking at myself really with understanding what's going on with me, accepting where I'm at, the emotions that are coming up, and really attributing God's love and forgiveness and right standing to myself. Victimhood is a whole different mindset in my mind, Leslie. It's not taking responsibility. It's really sulking and feeling bad for myself. Maybe a sense of helplessness that I can't do anything different. I'm stuck in this. What else would you have to say?
I would say there's a big difference. Yeah. So let's just define victim and victimhood. Some people are victims of horrible things. So, we're seeing in the news the Hamas refugees or the hostages being released, and they were victims. They were captured. They were victims. They were victimized. They were victims, right? And people who are legitimate victims, like Viktor Frankl in the Holocaust, like people who are raped, like people who are in abusive marriages, they're legitimate victims. We don't want you to think that if you're a victim, you're living in victimhood. There's a psychological term, victimhood, that means you aren't taking any responsibility, not for what happened to you, because you can't. You were a victim. That's the very definition of a victim. You were victimized. You couldn't control it. You were raped. You were beaten up. You were taken hostage. You didn't have power. You didn't have control, or you wouldn't have done that, right? So victim is victim. Victimhood is I'm not taking responsibility for what I'm doing with what happened to me. All I'm doing is getting stuck in what happened to me. That's my story. I'm a victim. This happened to me. I was raped when I was a child. Yes, you were raped when you were a child. And what's the story? Like, how did you get well? How did you work on getting through that? How did you heal? What did you do to get better? That's your story. And a victim who's in victimhood doesn't do that. They stay in this is what happened to me. This is what happened to me. This is what happened to me. Poor me. I can't get out. It's everyone else's fault. So that's what Diana's talking about with victimhood. And so we don't want to be compassionate toward victimhood because it's a very dysfunctional, unhealthy mindset. But we do want to be compassionate toward victims, legitimate victims who are victimized by oppressive people. And I'm going to be talking about what the God has to say about that in the Bible, because God is very clear that there are victims and there are oppressors. And how do we be compassionate towards someone who's been victimized by someone who's been a bully pastor, a bully husband, a bully mother, bully father, bully friend? And what do you need to do to stop that, right? You may not be able to stop being captured by a bad person or being put in a concentration camp. You may not be able to stop that. So some victims are just victims because they can't do it. But sometimes when we're a willing victim, right, we stay in a destructive marriage. We let ourselves be abused over and over again, not because we want it. We don't know what else to do. It's our responsibility to say, hey, what do I need to do to get out of this, right? So that's where we want to help people have compassion. Yes, I thought this was my job as a Christian woman, just to put up with all of this. And now I don't believe that anymore. So I can have compassion for the self that was ignorant or deceived or didn't know any better. And now that I know better, I'm going to do better. So it's both and. It's having the compassion and the capacity, the compassion and the curiosity. Does that help? Yeah. I would love to, what if our need involves punishing the person that hurt us? What do you think about that, Diana?
Well, I think the word punishing for me is a little bit confusing because I think it tells me a little bit about what you feel about responding to someone who's hurt you. And maybe standing up for yourself or invoking consequences to you feels like punishment. And maybe the other person that you're dealing with uses that language or kind of flips that narrative. But I don't, when I think about standing up for myself or invoking consequences for someone who has hurt me, I don't think of it in terms of punishing. I think of it just in terms of taking care of myself, right?
Yeah, and most of the time we don't have the power to punish someone in, I mean, unless we're sinning. We don't have the power to punish someone for what they've done. But what we do have the power to do is get out of the way of consequences. So that sometimes the consequences will punish them. So if my husband, for example, my husband doesn't do this, but if your husband hits you, if he hits you and you are in reality, this is abusive, I'm calling the police. I'm not saying you're going to say that out loud to him, but you do. And he gets arrested and put in jail. You didn't punish him. You don't have the power to put someone in jail. All you have the power to do is speak the truth to the important authorities who do have power to implement consequences for crimes, for abuse, for things like that. And jail does some people good, according to Henry Cloud. He says in his book, Necessary Endings. So you don't, you might punish a child because you have power over them to like, hey, you're not going to get the car because you've broken my trust and you used the car in a way that I don't want you to use the car. And so you lose privilege. I'm punishing you. And we can do that in anger and hatred. And we can do that in love for the well-being of our child because we do have the power over them as their children. But with other adults, we don't really have power over someone to punish them. We can be sinful and, say horrible things, but that's really not punishing them. That's abusing them back. So you have to decide. I think this is really, really important here. You have to decide what kind of person you want to be and how you want to handle your side of the street when someone does something hurtful to you. And I think it's not selfish or wrong to bring in the legal authorities. Romans 13 says God has provided us with legal authority. So many women, another belief, oh, I can't call the police because that's bringing in the law. And God says we should not, bring our believers before the courts. That's a misuse of that passage. That's talking about civil matters. It's not talking about criminal matters. When someone does something criminal to you, the police are put in place by God to protect us from evildoers. And if someone's doing something criminal to you, they should be punished because that might wake them up so that they can stop doing that. So that's about as well as we can answer the question without knowing specifically what punishment you want to do. Here's a question, Diana. How am I compassionate, or how can I be compassionate towards someone I know is guilt tripping me over the consequences? So we've just talked about consequences of his action, but will not own his behavior even after I've moved out. He keeps blaming me. How do I care for me?
Well, there's two questions there. How do I be compassionate to someone who I know is guilty? I think we have compassion over their blindness, really, and their inability to see their own sin, their compassion at their fallenness or whatever brokenness it has taken in their lives to get them to this point. And what I do with that, Leslie, is I turn that matter over to God. Compassion for me is understanding what they don't have capacity for or what they're not choosing in this moment. And it's a compassionate act of kindness for me when I can pray for somebody, because sometimes my heart is so hard I don't even want to pray for them, right? But and for me, that's just the best way that I know how to deal with having compassion for someone. Understanding that he's guilt tripping you is awesome, because now you're empowered to know that this is a manipulation. So you don't have to step into that, right? And just recognizing and telling yourself the truth that he is not willing to accept responsibility for what he's doing. And let's see, what's the second part of this? Over the consequences, but will not own his own behavior. Yeah. And so you have taught me well, notice what he's not willing to do. He's not owning it. He's not taking responsibility. And you have to preach that to yourself so that you don't take responsibility or feel guilt over that. And then I think that's caring for yourself, is preaching to yourself, telling yourself the truth, not stepping into the manipulation, the gaslighting, the blame shifting. That's how you nurture yourself with the truth.
Yeah, so let's just put some shoe leather to this. I'm going to make up a story. So let's say that your husband was, deceitful or watching porn or, some big sin, and you separated from him. All right. And he's not taking responsibility for what he's done, but he's living in his car because I have no money to get a house, and you living in the house, and poor me, I'm having to live in my car, and it's so cold, and it's all your fault that I have to live in the car because you are so hard-hearted and won't forgive me, and you don't get it that, and so I've had these situations in our ministry, right? So he's living in his car because he's blaming you for kicking him out, not taking responsibility for I broke your trust, go call a friend, live with your mother. There's the other options besides living in your car, but I don't want to tell anybody that we're separated. And so I'm going to live in my car and make it your fault that that's the decision I've made. So how do you have compassion for someone like that? First of all, you don't buy into their game. You stay strong, and you have, and pity would be another word, pity for his blindness. Like, wow, what a sad human being. What a sad grown-up that he can't see. He's so messed up inside. I'm sad for him. I have compassion. That doesn't mean I'm letting him come back in the house. It means he has to learn to take responsibility for himself and the consequences of his choices. But I can pray, like Diana said, I can pray because there's a really powerful verse in Romans 12:21. It says, do not, here's stewarding yourself again, do not let yourself be overcome by evil, right? Because evil comes at us. Right? Their manipulation, their game playing, their deflection, their accusations, their deceit. It's coming right at us, right? We have someone in the Facebook whose husband cursed at their mother. Evil came right at you, right? And it says, do not let that overcome. Well, how do you not do that? The pause. The pause. I notice, just like if you noticed you just got stung by a bee, you can almost feel the venom going in you. Right? When I got bit by a spider last year, I knew right away I got bit, and the poison was going up my leg. I could feel it. Right? And so you're stung by poison, evil. And Paul is saying, apply the antidote. Apply the antidote. Do not let yourself be overcome by evil, because guess what? If you don't give yourself the pause, the evil's going to come right back out at them. And what's the pause? I notice I got stung. I'm going to apply the antidote, not to overcome their evil, but to overcome the evil in me that just got triggered. And compassion is one of the antidotes. Truth is one of the antidotes. The pause is one of the antidotes, so that you're not just reacting and it's tit for tat, evil for evil. And just one more little hint. Diane and I have both done a good deal of marriage counseling. And when you're overcome by your husband's evil and you stand before a counselor and you're dysregulated and you're just as ugly as he is, by telling your story with all of the curse words or, and feel very entitled because what he did to me is awful, you sound just as crazy as he does. And it's really hard for the counselor to see what's going on, because you look destructive, he looks destructive. You look unhealthy, he looks unhealthy. And the counselor is having a hard time hearing your story that he's abusive when you're flinging a few things back at him too. And that's why it's so important for you to do your work to keep your side of the street of the clean, not to keep your marriage together. It may not be saved. It may not be salvageable, but so that things are really clear, especially in front of your kids. And compassion will help you do that. But it's hard to practice compassion towards someone else who's really doing bad things if you can't even practice it towards your own self when you might be doing a few bad things or not crossing all your T's and dotting all your I's just right. Right? Yeah. April says, hurt people, hurt people. Hurt people, hurt people. So I think we have one more question. How to detach. How do I detach? Live separately? That's one option. Let's say you can't live separately right now. What would be some ways of detaching so that you're not continuing to get triggered by someone's destructive behavior? Any thoughts, Diana?
Well, I think, we think about boundaries and detachment. It's really bad thunderstorm here. We're having hail and everything. Yeah. It's almost like for one moment, it was almost as dark as the eclipse.
Wow.
Yeah. But detachment for me, first, I think of emotionally, right? If I'm going to detach and I'm still in the same environment with somebody, I'm going to reserve and protect my heart, right? I'm going to detach emotionally from sharing those deeper parts of myself. Maybe that's the deeper parts of myself emotionally, spiritually. And I might even, depending on how destructive the person is, I might not invite them into any aspects of my life. And so in that way, I'm not inviting them to harm me emotionally anymore, right? And I think detachment can be on a continuum. Detachment might mean I'm no longer really going to go places with you, do things with you. And it sends a message that your behavior is not acceptable to me and something needs to change because you're not safe for me and I'm not willing to harm myself any longer. So for me, that's compassionate to myself to detach from someone who is harming me. And it's good stewardship of who I am.
Right. And detaching doesn't mean you don't care about them. It just means that it's sort of like you're creating boundaries that protect you from their toxicity that they're not willing to deal with. Sort of like if you had somebody who was sick in your house and they weren't willing to put a mask on, well, you're going to put a mask on, right? That's a bit detaching. Oh, how come you have to wear a mask? Why can't I kiss you? Because you're sick. I'm not going to let myself get infected with what you have, right? I can't control you, but I can control me. And you might get some kickback. You might get some criticism. And that's the lack of compassion for you from him, but you're the one who has to have compassion. It's okay. It's okay for you to take care of you. God calls you to take care of you. You're not being a bad Christian. You're not being a bad wife for you to steward you against his toxicity. And that's what detaching is. It doesn't mean you don't care about him. It means you stop letting him impact you like you used to, as much as you can control. And that you don't need him to be your source anymore. You're not going to look for him for that. That's moving from that man-centered woman to a God-centered woman. All right, what we'd like you to do now is it's hard to do. It is hard to do because that's not what marriage was meant for. We weren't meant to detach in marriage, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes it's necessary because marriage is a relationship. It's not just a contract. It's a relationship. And when the relationship is unsafe and it needs repairs, it's sort of like my house right now. It's got termites. We were just doing a new kitchen and all of a sudden we've got termites. And I was telling Diana, so now I'm living in Prescott. I've got no food here. Anybody live in Prescott want to bring me some food? I have to call. I've never used an Uber Eats or a service. I have no car here. My husband's taking care of termites down there. And you can't fix the house without fixing the termites first, right? And it's a wonderful example of a marriage. If your marriage is full of termites, you're not getting the good stuff until you get rid of the termites. And if he's unwilling to acknowledge and deal with the termites in your marriage, what do you do? What do you do? You have to distance yourself because you can't repair the house if you're not willing to look at the termites. And here we are. I'm in the house with the termites right now. And it's an example I've used often. And the exterminator came today and he said, yep, you got termites. And so now we've got to get rid of the termites before we can do anything else because we're not going to lay a new floor and put new cabinets on a house that has termites. So What's your takeaway from today? What's your takeaway from today? Put it in the chat. Put your takeaway, and don't forget to sign up for the workshop, lesliebernick.com/join workshop. We are going to do another Facebook Live tomorrow morning on how do you get through things getting worse before they get better, part of healing. How do we get through the hard stuff that we have to go through when we're changing and we're making decisions that are hard and there are consequences and our kids get hurt and people blame us? And how do we get through that while we're trying to make some changes? Mary, I love that. I am worth it. That's your takeaway. I am worth it. Love it. Love it. You can have pity and pray for him while being compassionate for myself at the same time. Wonderful. Great takeaways. Thanks so much for being with us today. Thanks, Diana, for joining me. I hope you're safe in that thunderstorm. And I will tell you part 2 of the termite story tomorrow. I hope I figure out how to order food for me here. I'm freezing cold and no food. So we'll see what we do. And I'll see you tomorrow. Probably be in the same place because my husband's down there taking care of the termites and I don't want to be with the termites. So I'm here. We'll see you tomorrow, 12 o'clock noon, same time. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.